Section 19 of Coningsby, or the New Generation, by Benjamin Disraeli. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 4, Chapter 16. It was the noon of the day on which Sidonia was to leave the castle. The wind was high, the vast white clouds scudded over the blue heaven, the leaves yet green and tender branches snapped like glass, were whirled in eddies from the trees, the grassy sward undulated like the ocean with 1,000 tints and shadows. From the window of the music room, Lucretia Colonna gazed on the turbulent sky. The heaven of her heart, too, was disturbed. She turned from the agitated external world to ponder over her inward emotion. She uttered a deep sigh. Slowly she moved towards her harp. Wildly, almost unconsciously, she touched with one hand its strings while her eyes were fixed on the ground. An imperfect melody resounded, yet plaintive and passionate. It seemed to attract her soul. She raised her head, and then touching the strings with both her hands, she poured forth tones of deep yet thrilling power. I am a stranger in the halls of a stranger. Ah, whither shall I flee? To the castle of my fathers in the green mountains, to the palace of my fathers in the ancient city. There is no flag on the castle of my fathers in the green mountains. Silent is the palace of my fathers in the ancient city. Is there no home for the homeless? Can the unloved never find love? Ah, thou fliest away, fleet cloud. He will leave us swifter than thee. Alas, cutting wind, thy breath is not so cold as his heart. I am a stranger in the halls of a stranger. Ah, whither shall I flee? The door of the music room slowly opened. It was Sidonia. His hat was in his hand. He was evidently on the point of departure. Those sounds assured me, he said calmly but kindly as he advanced, that I might find you here, on which I scarcely counted at so early an hour. 'You are going then?' said the Princess. 'My carriage is at the door. The Marquess has delayed me. I must be in London to night. I conclude more abruptly than I could have wished one of the most agreeable visits I ever made, and I hope you will permit me to express to you how much I am indebted to you for a society which those should deem themselves fortunate who can more frequently enjoy.' He held forth his hand, she extended hers, cold as marble, which he bent over, but did not press to his lips. 'Lord Monmouth talks of remaining here some time,' he observed. 'But I suppose next year, if not this, we shall all meet in some city of the earth?' Lucretia bowed, and Sidonia with a graceful reverence withdrew. The Princess Lucretia stood for some moments motionless. A sound attracted her to the window. She perceived the equipage of Sidonia whirling along the winding roads of the park. She watched it till it disappeared, then quitting the window, she threw herself into a chair and buried her face in her shawl. End of chapter 16. End of book 4. Book 5, Chapter 1. A university life did not bring to Coningsby that feeling of emancipation usually experienced by freshmen. The contrast between school and college life is perhaps under any circumstances less striking to the Etonian than to others. He has been prepared for becoming his own master by the liberty wisely entrusted to him in his boyhood, and which is in general discreetly exercised. But there were also other reasons why Coningsby should have been less impressed with the novelty of his life, and have encountered less temptations than commonly are met with in the new existence which a university opens to youth. In the interval which had elapsed between quitting Eton and going to Cambridge, brief as the period may comparatively appear, Coningsby had seen much of the world. 3 or 4 months indeed may not seem, at first blush, a course of time which can very materially influence the formation of character. But time must not be counted by calendars, but by sensations, by thought. Coningsby had felt a good deal, reflected more. He had encountered a great number of human beings, offering a vast variety of character for his observation. It was not merely manners, but even the intellectual and moral development of the human mind, which in a great degree, unconsciously to himself, had been submitted to his study and his scrutiny. New trains of ideas had been opened to him. His mind was teeming with suggestions. The horizon of his intelligence had insensibly expanded. He perceived that there were other opinions in the world besides those to which he had been habituated. The depths of his intellect had been stirred. He was a wiser man. He distinguished three individuals whose acquaintance had greatly influenced his mind: Eustace Lyle, the elder Millbank, above all, Sidonia. He curiously meditated over the fact that three English subjects, one of them a principal landed proprietor, another one of the most eminent manufacturers, and the third the greatest capitalist in the kingdom, all of them men of great intelligence, and doubtless of a high probity and conscience, were in their hearts disaffected with the political constitution of the country. Yet unquestionably these were the men among whom we ought to seek for some of our first citizens. What then was this repulsive quality in those institutions which we persisted in calling national, and which once were so? Here was a great question. There was another reason also why Coningsby should feel a little fastidious among his new habits, and without being aware of it, a little depressed. For 3 or 4 months, and for the first time in his life, he had passed his time in the continual society of refined and charming women. It is an acquaintance which, when habitual, exercises a great influence over the tone of the mind, even if it does not produce any more violent effects. It refines the taste, quickens the perception, and gives, as it were, a grace and flexibility to the intellect. Coningsby, in his solitary rooms arranging his books, sighed when he recalled the Lady Everinghams and the Lady Theresas, the gracious Duchess, the frank, good-natured Madame Colonna, that deeply interesting enigma, the Princess Lucretia, and the gentle Flora. He thought with disgust of the impending dissipation of a university which could only be an exaggeration of their coarse frolics at school. It seemed rather vapid, this mighty Cambridge, over which they had so often talked in the playing fields of Eton, with such anticipations of its vast and absorbing interest. And those university honours that once were the great object of his aspirations, they did not figure in that grandeur with which they once haunted his imagination. What Coningsby determined to conquer was knowledge. He had watched the influence of Sidonia in society with an eye of unceasing vigilance. Coningsby perceived that all yielded to him, that Lord Monmouth even, who seemed to respect none, gave place to his intelligence, appealed to him, listened to him, was guided by him. What was the secret of this influence? Knowledge. On all subjects his views were prompt and clear, and this not more from his native sagacity and reach of view, than from the aggregate of facts which rose to guide his judgment and illustrate his meaning, from all countries and all ages, instantly at his command. The friends of Coningsby were now hourly arriving. It seemed when he met them again that they had all suddenly become men since they had separated, Buckhurst especially. He had been at Paris, and returned with his mind very much opened, and trousers made in quite a new style. All his thoughts were how soon he could contrive to get back again, and he told them endless stories of actresses and dinners at fashionable cafés. Vere enjoyed Cambridge most because he had been staying with his family since he quitted Eton. Henry Sidney was full of church architecture, national sports, restoration of the order of the peasantry, and was to maintain a constant correspondence on these and similar subjects with Eustace Lyle. Finally, however, they all fell into a very fair, regular, routine life. They all read a little, but not with the enthusiasm which they had once projected. Buckhurst drove 4 in hand, and they all of them sometimes assisted him, but not immoderately. Their suppers were sometimes gay, but never outrageous, and among all of them the school friendship was maintained unbroken, and even undisturbed. The fame of Coningsby preceded him at Cambridge. No man ever went up from whom more was expected in every way. The dons awaited a sucking member for the University; the undergraduates were prepared to welcome a new Alcibiades. He was neither a prig nor a profligate, but a quiet, gentlemanlike, yet spirited young man, gracious to all, but intimate only with his old friends, and giving always an impression of his general tone that his soul was not absorbed in his University. And yet perhaps he might have been coddled into a prig, or flattered into a profligate, had it not been for the intervening experience which he had gained between his school and college life. That had visibly impressed upon him what before he had only faintly acquired from books, that there was a greater and more real world awaiting him than to be found in those bowers of Academus, to which youth is apt at first to attribute an exaggerated importance. A world of action and passion, of power and peril; a world for which a great preparation was indeed necessary, severe and profound, but not altogether such a one as was now offered to him. Yet this want must be supplied, and by himself. Coningsby had already acquirements sufficiently considerable, with some formal application, to ensure him at all times his degree. He was no longer engrossed by the intention he once proudly entertained of trying for honours, and he chalked out for himself that range of reading which, digested by his thought, should furnish him in some degree with that various knowledge of the history of man to which he aspired. No, we must not for a moment believe that accident could have long diverted the course of a character so strong. The same desire that prevented the castle of his grandfather from proving a castle of indolence to him, that saved him from a too early initiation into the seductive distractions of a refined and luxurious society, would have preserved Coningsby from the puerile profligacy of a college life, or from being that idol of private tutors, a young pedant. It was that noble ambition, the highest and best, that must be born in the heart and organised in the brain, which will not let a man be content unless his intellectual power is recognised by his race, and desires that it should contribute to their welfare. It is the heroic feeling, the feeling that in old days produced demigods, without which no state is safe, without which political institutions are meat without salt, the crown a bauble, the church an establishment, parliaments debating clubs, and civilisation itself but a fitful and transient dream. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Less than a year after the arrival of Coningsby at Cambridge, and which he had only once quitted in the interval, and that to pass a short time in Berkshire with his friend Buckhurst, occurred the death of King William IV. This event necessarily induced a dissolution of the Parliament, elected under the auspices of Sir Robert Peel in 1834, and after the publication of the Tamworth Manifesto. The death of the King was a great blow to what had now come to be generally styled the Conservative cause. It was quite unexpected; within a fortnight of his death, eminent persons still believed that it was only the hay fever. Had his Majesty lived until after the then impending registration, the Whigs would have been again dismissed. Nor is there any doubt that under these circumstances the Conservative cause would have secured for the new ministers a parliamentary majority. What would have been the consequences to the country if the 4 years of Whig rule, from 1837 to 1841, had not occurred? It is easier to decide what would have been the consequences to the Whigs. Some of their great friends might have lacked blue ribbons and Lord Lieutenancies, and some of their little friends comfortable places in the Customs and Excise. They would have lost, undoubtedly, the distribution of 4 years' patronage; we can hardly say the exercise of 4 years' power; but they would have existed at this moment as the most powerful and popular opposition that ever flourished in this country, if, indeed, the course of events had not long ere this carried them back to their old posts in a proud and intelligible position. The Reform Bill did not do more injury to the Tories than the attempt to govern the country without a decided parliamentary majority did the Whigs. The greatest of all evils is a weak government. They cannot carry good measures. They are forced to carry bad ones. The death of the King was a great blow to the Conservative cause. That is to say, it darkened the brow of Tadpole, quailed the heart of Taper, crushed all the rising hopes of those numerous statesmen who believed that the country must be saved if they received 1,200 a year. It is a peculiar class that. 1,200 pounds per annum paid quarterly is their idea of political science and human nature. To receive 1,200 pounds per annum is government. To try to receive 1,200 pounds per annum is opposition. To wish to receive 1,200 pounds per annum is ambition. If a man wants to get into Parliament and does not want to get 1,200 pounds per annum, they look upon him as daft, as a benighted being. They stare in each other's faces and ask, what can blank want to get into Parliament for? They have no conception that public reputation is a motive power, and with many men the greatest. They have as much idea of fame or celebrity, even of the masculine impulse of an honourable pride, as eunuchs of manly joys. The 1,200 a yearers were in despair about the King's death. Their loyal souls were sorely grieved that his gracious Majesty had not outlived the registration. All their happy inventions about hay fever, circulated in confidence, and sent by post to chairmen of Conservative associations, followed by a royal funeral. General election about to take place with the old registration. Government boroughs against them, and the young Queen for a cry. What a cry! Youth, beauty, and a Queen! Taper grew pale at the thought. What could they possibly get up to countervail it? Even Church and Corn Laws together would not do. And then Church was sulky, for the Conservative cause had just made it a present of a commission, and all that the country gentlemen knew of Conservatism was that it would not repeal the malt tax, and had made them repeal their pledges. Yet a cry must be found. A dissolution without a cry, in the Taper philosophy, would be a world without a sun. A rise might be got by independence of the House of Lords, and Lord Lyndhurst's summaries might be well circulated at 1 penny per hundred, large discount allowed to Conservative associations, and endless credit. Tadpole, however, was never very fond of the House of Lords. Besides, it was too limited. Tadpole wanted the young Queen brought in. The rogue! At length, one morning, Taper came up to him with a slip of paper, and a smile of complacent austerity on his dull visage. 'I think, Mr. Tadpole, that will do.' Tadpole took the paper and read, 'Our young Queen and our old institutions.' The eyes of Tadpole sparkled as if they had met a gnomic sentence of Periander or Thales. Then turning to Taper, he said, 'What do you think of ancient instead of old?' 'You cannot have our modern Queen and our ancient institutions,' said Mr. Taper. The dissolution was soon followed by an election for the borough of Cambridge. The Conservative cause candidate was an old Etonian. There was a bond of sympathy which imparted zeal even to those who were a little sceptical of the essential virtues of Conservatism. Every undergraduate, especially who remembered the distant spires, became enthusiastic. Buckhurst took a very decided part. He cheered, he canvassed, he brought men to the poll whom none could move, he influenced his friends and his companions. Even Coningsby caught the contagion, and Vere, who had imbibed much of Coningsby's political sentiment, prevailed on himself to be neutral. The Conservative cause triumphed in the person of its Eton champion. The day the member was chaired, several men in Coningsby's rooms were talking over their triumph. 'By Jove!' said the panting Buckhurst, throwing himself on the sofa, 'it was well done. Never was anything better done. An immense triumph. The greatest triumph the Conservative cause has had. And yet,' he added, laughing, 'if any fellow were to ask me what the Conservative cause is, I am sure I should not know what to say.' 'Why, it is the cause of our glorious institutions,' said Coningsby. 'A crown robbed of its prerogatives, a church controlled by a commission, and an aristocracy that does not lead. under whose genial influence the order of the peasantry, a country's pride, has vanished from the face of the land, said Henry Sidney, and is succeeded by a race of serfs who are called labourers and who burn ricks. Under which, continued Coningsby, the crown has become a cipher, the church a sect, the nobility drones, and the people drudges. It is the great constitutional cause, said Lord Vere, that refuses everything to opposition, yields everything to agitation, conservative in Parliament, destructive out of doors, that has no objection to any change, provided only it be effected by unauthorised means. The first public association of men, said Coningsby, who have worked for an avowed end without enunciating a single principle. And who have established political infidelity throughout the land, said Lord Henry. By Jove, said Buckhurst, what infernal fools we have made ourselves this last week. Nay, said Coningsby, smiling, it was our last schoolboy weakness. Floreat Etona under all circumstances. I certainly, Coningsby, said Lord Vere, shall not assume the Conservative cause instead of the cause for which Hampden died in the field and Sidney on the scaffold. The cause for which Hampden died in the field and Sidney on the scaffold, said Coningsby, was the cause of the Venetian Republic. How? cried Buckhurst. I repeat it, said Coningsby. The great object of the Whig leaders in England from the first movement under Hampden to the last most successful one in 1688 was to establish in England a high aristocratic republic on the model of the Venetian, then the study and admiration of all speculative politicians. Read Harrington, turn over Algernon Sidney, and you will see how the minds of the English leaders in the 17th century were saturated with the Venetian type. And they at length succeeded. William III found them out. He told the Whig leaders, I will not be a Doge. He balanced parties. He baffled them as the Puritans baffled them 50 years before. The reign of Anne was a struggle between the Venetian and the English systems. Two great Whig nobles, Argyle and Somerset, worthy of seats in the Council of Ten, forced their sovereign on her deathbed to change the ministry. They accomplished their object. They brought in a new family on their own terms. George I was a Doge. George II was a Doge. They were what William III, a great man, would not be. George III tried not to be a Doge, but it was impossible materially to resist the deeply laid combination. He might get rid of the Whig magnificos, but he could not rid himself of the Venetian constitution. And the Venetian constitution did govern England from the accession of the House of Hanover until 1832. Now, I do not ask you, Vere, to relinquish the political tenets which in ordinary times would have been your inheritance. All I say is, the constitution introduced by your ancestors having been subverted by their descendants, your contemporaries, beware of still holding Venetian principles of government when you have not a Venetian constitution to govern with. Do what I'm doing, what Henry Sidney and Buckhurst are doing, what other men that I could mention are doing. Hold yourself aloof from political parties which, from the necessity of things, have ceased to have distinctive principles, and are therefore practically only factions, and wait and see whether with patience, energy, honour, and Christian faith, and a desire to look to the national welfare and not to sectional and limited interests, whether, I say, we may not discover some great principles to guide us, to which we may adhere, and which then, if true, will ultimately guide and control others. The Whigs are worn out, said Vere. Conservatism is a sham, and radicalism is pollution. I certainly, said Buckhurst, when I get into the House of Commons, shall speak my mind without reference to any party whatever, and all I hope is we may all come in at the same time, and then we may make a party of our own. I have always heard my father say, said Vere, that there was nothing so difficult as to organise an independent party in the House of Commons. Ay, but that was in the Venetian period, Vere, said Henry Sidney, smiling. I dare say, said Buckhurst. The only way to make a party in the House of Commons is just the one that succeeds anywhere else. Men must associate together. When you are living in the same set, dining together every day, and quizzing the dons, it is astonishing how well men agree. As for me, I would never enter into a conspiracy, unless the conspirators were fellows who had been at Eton with me, and then there would be no treachery.' 'Let us think of principles and not of parties,' said Coningsby. 'For my part,' said Buckhurst, 'whenever a political system is breaking up, as in this country at present, I think the very best thing is to brush all the old dons off the stage. They never take to the new road kindly. They are always hampered by their exploded prejudices and obsolete traditions. I don't think a single man, Vere, that sat in the Venetian Senate ought to be allowed to sit in the present English House of Commons.' 'Well, no one does in our family, except my uncle Philip,' said Lord Henry; 'and the moment I want it he will resign, for he detests Parliament. It interferes so with his hunting.' 'Well, we all have fair parliamentary prospects,' said Buckhurst. 'That is something. I wish we were in now.' 'Heaven forbid!' said Coningsby. 'I tremble at the responsibility of a seat at any time. With my present unsettled and perplexed views, there is nothing from which I should recoil so much as the House of Commons.' 'I quite agree with you,' said Henry Sydney. 'The best thing we can do is to keep as clear of political party as we possibly can. How many men waste the best part of their lives in painfully apologising for conscientious deviation from a parliamentary course which they adopted when they were boys, without thought, or prompted by some local connection or interest to secure a seat.' It was the midnight following the morning when this conversation took place, that Coningsby alone, and having just quitted a rather boisterous party of wassailers who had been celebrating at Buckhurst's rooms the triumph of Eton statesmen, if not of conservative principles, stopped in the precincts of that royal college that reminded him of his school days, to cool his brow in the summer air, that even at that hour was soft, and to calm his mind in the contemplation of the still, the sacred, and the beauteous scene that surrounded him. There rose that fane, the pride and boast of Cambridge, not unworthy to rank among the chief temples of Christendom. Its vast form was exaggerated in the uncertain hour, part shrouded in the deepest darkness, while a flood of silver light suffused its southern side, distinguished with revealing beam the huge ribs of its buttresses, and bathed with mild lustre its airy pinnacles. 'Where is the spirit that raised these walls?' thought Coningsby. 'Is it indeed extinct? Is then this civilisation, so much vaunted, inseparable from moderate feelings and little thoughts? If so, give me back barbarism. But I cannot believe it. Man that is made in the image of the Creator is made for godlike deeds. Come what come may, I will cling to the heroic principle. It can alone satisfy my soul.' End of chapter 2. End of section 19.